Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to this brand new, fresh episode of HR Buzz Chat Live. We once again have a fantastic guest to have a conversation with today on a topic that I think is going to get your creative juices flowing. So today we're talking about something that comes up in almost every HR conversation at the moment, and that's the digital skills gap. Organizations everywhere are saying they just can't find the talent that they need, particularly in digital and tech roles. But the real question might actually be a little different. Are we actually recruiting for the wrong skills? Because the same time as organizations say they can't find the digital talent, we're also seeing that huge shifts happening in the workforce. AI is starting to automate traditional knowledge work. The lines between blue collar and white collar jobs are shifting. And the skills that organizations need 5 years from now might look very different to the ones they're recruiting for today. In fact, there may be jobs in 5 years' time that we don't even know are going to exist yet. They don't even exist right now. So today we're going to explore why the digital skills gap exists. We're going to be looking at whether organizations are looking for the wrong capabilities and how AI might reshape the workforce in ways that perhaps HR isn't fully prepared for yet. And to discuss this, I'm joined by the wonderful Storm Rae. Welcome to the show today, Storm. Storm Rae is doing some fantastic work in this space, which is why we've invited her on today. She's a digital skills educator and workforce development specialist and currently lectures at Cranfield University's MKU, where she delivers the Digital Technology Solutions Degree Apprenticeship Program. Try saying that quickly 10 times. She works with students specializing in areas like cybersecurity, software engineering, data analysis, and business analysis. So she's right at the front line of preparing the next generation of digital talent. Storm previously led learning at the National Museum of Computing and Bletchley Park, where she grew learner engagement from 1,500 to 15,000 people annually. Pretty impressive. She's also a recognized voice on AI literacy and workforce readiness, speaking at events like Disrupt HR, and her work on AI training programs was even presented at Downing Street as part of the G7 AI Safety Summit. Storm, it's amazing to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Jamie. It's a pleasure to be here. We've been talking about this for quite a while now, haven't we?
We have, and you have a very impressive resume. And I recall from, you've been at a few of our events now and talked quite a lot on the AI landscape, and always find what you have to say really, really interesting. So I'm very excited to get into the weeds of this today. You're working directly with people entering the workforce, and organizations talk constantly about this digital skills shortage. But from what you're seeing, is there actually a shortage of talent, or are organizations perhaps looking for the wrong things? What are your thoughts?
I tend to be led a little bit by the stats on this one. I mean, my views are obviously quite biased because I work in a space where we are seeing uptake by young people of these digital areas of study. But if you look at the King's Trust research, it shows that over a third of young people today are not choosing to take technology-related qualifications at school. And we're not really seeing a real reason for that. So the one that's kind of publicized is this concept that they don't think technology related skills are going to be relevant to them in their future employment. And I think that can come across as quite shocking. Obviously, anyone who works in this space at the moment is sat there going, how vital these skills are going to be. So there is a real disconnect there. But I think the underlying issue is slightly tangential to that. I think some of the issue comes around the types of qualification and training that we are providing in schools. They say they don't think it's necessarily going to be relevant. Well, I would say that actually the curriculum is quite outdated. There's been a lot of work going on recently to try and refresh that curriculum and bring it into the 21st century, as it were. They're looking at a new digital literacy GCSE and things like this. But the problem we have there is obviously there is a teaching shortage as well. We're struggling to deliver computing subjects by specialised teachers now, let alone with a whole new curriculum that's been designed as well. So yeah, we've got a couple of real issues that I think are compounding into this space. I think we expect young people to be coming into the workforce work ready, as it were. And really, we don't have the expertise in schools to make sure that that's happening.
I completely resonate with all of that. And it's an interesting point there you make about expecting these students, these young people, to come into the world of work ready. But I think now more than ever, you look at even just a few years' time, what does that world of work look like? And what are we doing to prepare those young people? And having kids myself, it's really challenging because, you know, back 20, 30 years ago, it was fairly easy to prepare your children for what they were walking out into because you had a fairly good idea. Yes, things were going to change, but you had a fairly good idea of where they were going to be because they weren't changing that quickly. Whereas now, the rate of change, particularly technologically, is just insane, to the point where, I mean, you look at where AI, as an example, was just 18 months ago, it's radically different from where it is today. And one of the things this reminds me of is kind of reminiscent of why the space race ended up. You know, we went to the moon and we did all this cool stuff and we sent the Voyager probes out, but then we just stopped doing things. And the biggest reason for that was that technology started to accelerate at such a pace that if we designed, built, and launched a probe or a spaceship now, by the time it got to where it was going, we would have advanced so much that we would have been able to build a spaceship 10 times better to go 10 times further. And so the investment was considered not worth it. It was like, well, we'll just wait for that technological advancement and then we'll do it then, and then we'll do it then. And it keeps kind of getting pushed back. And it feels like we're in a similar kind of place with AI and robotics and quantum computing right now.
There is this recurring theme that we see, and you're right, it's happened with the atomic race, with the space race, with the robotics and automation within factory spaces. And we are now seeing it with AI. But I would like to kind of highlight, this isn't the first time we've been here with AI. We've had various AI winters where the theory has got to the point where actually the technology can't keep up. We're now at a stage where the technology is really, really good, but ultimately we're still waiting for the theory at this point to catch up. So yeah, there's lots of conversations we're seeing happen around ethics, around accountability, liability in a lot of cases, because obviously technology has had this really traditional view of move fast and break stuff. But we can't do that at the level that we're talking about integrating at this point. You mentioned obviously that we're trying to kind of prepare people for this uncertain future, and I absolutely see that. I do think that job churn has been something that we've seen before as well, particularly around factory workers and things like that. But I think whereas 10 years ago, it would have been quite natural for us to say to our young people, go and get a degree because your earning potential is going to be far greater. Look at areas that are in kind of data analytics or HR or kind of those kind of areas. And unfortunately, those fields are the first ones that seem to be being automated. So we've created this situation where we're encouraging young people into a space that actually was traditionally a gap, but technology has kind of been brought in to fill that. And now suddenly we've got people who are almost in the wrong space.
Yes, and I was listening to an interview with someone the other day, and they were talking about surgeons as an example of, you know, the world and what it's going to be, and how actually, you know, their opinion was that right now there is no point training to be a surgeon or a doctor, because in 3 to 5 years we are going to have AI-enabled robotics that can perform perfect surgeries better than any human surgeon currently can across the world. It's like access to pristine, perfect medical care and surgery for everybody because of our technology. And that's what I mean by this. It's synonymous to the space race, because it's like, well, what kind of skill shortages is that going to create in the interim between when those robots are actually at that level of capability and AI and all the rest of it, versus actually having enough people to go and do those roles? And we're already having a shortage of surgeons, doctors, and, you know, huge wait times, particularly here in the UK, for getting surgeries, medical kind of attention. Is that going to worsen? And are we seeing that extrapolated across the white collar workforces? Because I think, you know, 10, 15 years ago, the concern would be that the robots were going to come and take our jobs, and self-driving cars. And actually, I think the view was, well, it's the blue collar jobs that are most at risk here. And those are the ones that are going to go first because they're lowest skill. and so they're easiest to replace. But actually, that's not quite what we're seeing. It's flipped on its head, right? So actually, it's the white collar jobs that seem to be under the most threat right now because of AI, whereas the blue collar seems to be a little bit safer because we're still waiting for that robotics piece to catch up. So I'm curious, what are the biggest digital capability gaps that you see when organizations hire graduates or apprentices? And are businesses expecting too much too soon?
So I think you've hit a couple of points there that I'd really like to kind of build on, if I may.
Let's get
Um,
into it.
One is around this idea of kind of surgeons and robotics and things like that. And I think that's such a poignant example, right? At the moment, yes, we've got robotic surgeries happening. There was an article in the news, I think, a couple of days ago that was talking about a robotic surgery that had taken place across 1,500 miles or something across the world. And actually, when we think about robotic surgeries, at the moment, we still have a human on the other end. So the human is operating the machinery from one point in space, and then the robot is replicating that movement on an actual person on the other side of the world. You're absolutely right. We will be training those machines, and at some point there will come a tipping point where the machinery can carry out those. I mean, effectively, the machinery can carry out that operation itself. So where is the role for humans there? I would say that in the interim, we still need that human in the loop to really train these machinery to make sure that it is of that high quality. But we're also going to need the human in the loop at the other end to moderate that and supervise those processes as well. So I think there will come a time where the human becomes more of a supervisory role. So you're almost in a management position of all these kind of AIs that are doing your work for you. So I think that the skills gap is really shifting along that kind of spectrum of higher order thinking. So it's the critical evaluation. It is knowing which tool is the right one for the job. It is about efficiency. Increasingly, with the use of different amounts of energy for some of these AI applications, there will be a need for algorithmic efficiency, which traditionally we saw in computers back in the day, just in terms of the amount of memory they had. We're seeing that same issue on a much, much grander scale. So it's about knowing not just which tool to use, but when to use it, and actually how to get it to do what you're asking it to do ultimately as well. So I do think this kind of prompt engineering is going to become more of an area, and that kind of critical, like I say, evaluation. Is the information that it's sharing correct? We're seeing lots of examples where there is hallucination. We've got machines that are just agreeing with you. It becomes a little bit of an echo chamber. So I really think it's that critical thinking side that we need to adopt. I always liken it to the travelator at the airport. Are we just standing on the travelator and allowing it to carry us where we need to go? Or are we using it to get there twice as fast? And I think that needs to be the push for all of us, really. It is about doing more and better for good.
Yes, and this is something I focus on with my children. We home educate our 4 little ones, which is an incredible experience, as well as being very difficult in many ways. But my focus is obviously they need to learn to read, write, and do basic maths and all that kind of stuff. But for us, it's more of a focus on exactly what you've just touched on: critical thinking. How do I ask great questions? How do I interrogate data? And in a world where literally, we have these little devices where the whole world, the information of the world, is literally at our fingertips, it's less about being able to regurgitate learned knowledge and more be able to know how to ask the right questions to get the information that you need to be able to achieve the right outcome. And so I wonder, does this, by its very necessity, by its very nature, exclude a large portion of the population? You talked there about people having to be more supervisory, more managerial, and more critical thinkers. And being perfectly honest, that just isn't. Different people are at different levels when it comes to their ability for those skills. So how do we approach this in terms of both from a HR point of view, bringing the right skills in, but also doing our best not to exclude the whole workforce?
As you say, there is absolutely a gap, and I don't necessarily think the skills gap that we're talking about is the one that is really impacting this. There is absolutely a skills gap, But we're talking about digital natives, young people who have grown up with these forms of technology, and they are very, very au fait with using them. And then actually we've got within our organizations more mature, more experienced leaders who are maybe a little bit resistant to some of these forms of technology. So you're trying to kind of integrate these two very, very different perspectives. Young people today have fantastic skills with some of this stuff. They're able to create programs and search for information. And actually, when you are recruiting for a job, they can use these tools to do far more of a deep dive on the organization, on its cultural values, on its income. And they have the skills to be able to do that. So I do think there is an element of kind of the interview shifting a little bit as well. Individuals going into the workforce are looking for an opportunity that is going to align with them, their organizational beliefs, and their cultural values. So I do think there is a shift happening that way as well.
It's interesting because another conversation I was listening to was talking about how the availability of AI and the use of it, it actually, one way you could think of it is it's adding IQ points to your baseline IQ. So let's say you're at 100 IQ. Now you have access to something like ChatGPT or Grok or Claude or whichever your chosen AI tool is. And that's essentially adding 60 IQ points to your IQ rating. So you're at 160 now because you've got it's augmented by this tool. What are your thoughts on that and how workforces, organizations, and HR teams can leverage that more?
I really like this idea of kind of augmentation, because that's what it should be, right? It's a tool that we can use to augment, um, in the hopes that we can produce more, have better output, and have greater quality. I think what we're seeing though is lots of organizations have invested heavily in AI, and yet a very small percentage of them have actually reached what we would call kind of AI maturity, where it's embedded in their systems and they're seeing a real tangible output as a result of it. A lot of people are stuck in this almost kind of pilot phase where they've invested in the technology, they've kind of tried to encourage their workforce to use it, but they're yet to see anything really tangible coming out the other end of it. And that can be quite hard. So it comes back to this kind of gap we've been talking about previously. The system, like the training, is not embedded within these organizations to make effective use of these tools. And the young people kind of coming in don't have that either. They're used to kind of, it's very new to them, it's very exciting, and it suddenly means that they can get away with doing an assignment in half the amount of time they would have done previously. And it really mirrors a lot of the conversations we're seeing in education around assessment and things as well. Yeah, sorry, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there. I haven't answered your question at all, Jamie.
Not at all. I wonder, in terms of making a business case for this, coming back to that concept of adding 60 IQ points, let's just take that arbitrary number and assume it's somewhere near. In terms of selling this to a business and why they should invest in AI capabilities, training, and all the rest of it, I mean, just imagine the effects on any business. If you can add 60 IQ points to every single person working in that organization, what are the downstream effects of that, I wonder?
Well, I look at the guidance that's coming in around regulation, and that's one thing that I do try and kind of keep my eye on at the end of the tunnel. It's a great concept that we'll be able to do more with less, and I think that is a really seductive approach to AI. Do more with less, reduce your outgoings, increase your output, and yeah, I think that's a really attractive proposition to any business. Um, but I guess my question is around the ethics of it as well. Like, it's all well and good having people who can achieve more, um, but where is that line of when is it right to do so? And we've seen various examples of, I think there was, in fact, I've got an article somewhere here, that is about a recruitment agency that has got rid of their AI screening tools because it was biased against women. So the regulation that's coming in is saying you need to make sure that you are using it fairly and that the data you're using it against is unbiased. So where are people applying that aspect to this? So one of the things that I do in my marking is I use it to actually moderate myself, because we're all biased, right? We're humans. In fact, so the first piece of research I was involved in when I was doing my undergraduate was looking at facial recognition bias of humans. There is a reason that these technologies have these inbuilt issues. And I think we just need to be hyper vigilant and hyper aware that they are there. And that is definitely something we need to kind of think about. Yes, the IQ value is important. I don't think that when used properly, AI is going to get anything done any quicker, really. I do think it will increase the quality of output potentially and increase consistency and things like that. But that human in the loop is going to continue to be so very important. But I do think there needs to be a shift away from, okay, how can we get this technology to work? That is going to develop, as you've mentioned with the space race. It's going to become more and more easy to use. We're already seeing that. A chatbot is very simple to use, and actually with tools like GenSpark and other kind of super AIs that pull on all different tools, that user experience, that user interaction is going to become easier and easier to do. So I do think that one of the things we need to consider is it just because I can do this, does it mean I should?
Absolutely, and I think it was the Muller-Nathan experiment speaks to the biases of humans and how perhaps AI could be better by removing those biases. But as you say there, actually, it's not AI that's the problem. We built these things, we programmed these things, we taught these things how to think, and so actually, any imperfections, any biases that do appear in their code and those interactions, they are just a digital manifestation of flaws, I suppose, within us as human beings, rather than it being a flaw per se with the technology, right?
That brings us back to this idea of kind of accountability and liability, which when we're talking about regulation is going to become more and more important. I think there is this idea that actually when we automate some of these processes, we're automating the decision making. But when things go wrong, who's accountable? Where does that liability fall? And for an organization, you want to obviously reduce the chances of that as far as possible. So what does that look like? You've got organizations like MIT over in the States, the academic institution, and they're doing some fantastic work. And if anyone hasn't seen it yet, definitely check out Moral Machine. It is something that they've put together. It's like the trolley problem, but for autonomous vehicles. And what it's really kind of talking about is we have this idea of kind of right or wrong. It's very philosophical. But these are individuals' ideas of what's right and wrong. And that person needs to take accountability. The AI bill, the UK's AI bill, the proposal for it, and they're waiting to do anything further with it until the summer when they've got a steer from the US. But the UK's AI bill is looking at integrating an AI responsible officer within organisations. That is someone who is responsible, takes on that liability, is potentially at risk of fine if they're found to have used unfair data or biased data within their AI systems. So how do we have the skills for somebody to take on that role within every single organization and to confidently say, yes, the technology that we are using is unbiased, it's fair, etc.?
Yeah, and maybe slightly different, but it reminds me of the self-driving cars conversation. And you've got these people who are riding around in these cars, they're driving themselves. If that car causes an accident or hits somebody and that person gets hurt or worse, dies, who's responsible for that? Because surely a car can be responsible, right? It's a similar problem in organizations that I suppose people are wrestling with at the moment. So looking at all of that we've just discussed, what should AI literacy actually look like in the workplace?
So I think a lot of it depends on the tools that an organization is choosing to use. So depending on which tools they are ascribing to, depends what that training will look like, and it will be different for every single one. A lot of organizations are shifting towards Microsoft Copilot at the moment, which is generally selected because it integrates with a lot of the systems that organizations are currently using. There are general kind of points around privacy of information. So you're drawing on
Keeping it a closed environment.
exactly.
Yeah.
So the kind of security of the information that's being shared there is absolutely paramount to all of these organizations. So you've still got GDPR and things like that as well. You don't want to be sharing all of this externally. So yeah, Copilot has got a really strong foothold in the market there, and for good reason. There are other options out there, and I don't think people look at kind of locally hosted options as much as they maybe could do. But all of these tools have fantastic training resources. Microsoft have all sorts of online and free training resources that people just aren't using enough, if I'm honest. But companies seem to be kind of saying, okay, we're going to invest in these licenses, you have access to it, and then they just kind of expect it to be integrated seamlessly. Whereas I think there needs to be a conversation about, okay, where can we automate? Where should we automate? And then how can we? And it needs to be that kind of 3-tier system.
And how can we be prepared to fail in this? Because again, it kind of reminds me of when social media came to the fore in the early 2000s, and we, previously being obviously very social race human beings, and typically we would socialize in person physically. And then the internet came along, and then social media and MySpace, if you're old enough to remember that, and then Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and all of these things. And very quickly we were thrust into this unknown digital world. And I remember there was a period of maybe 5, 10, 15 years where, and maybe we even still are, trying to figure out how the bloody hell we behave online. How do we interact in the digital space? And AI reminds me of that. It's like we've got these tools and we're desperately scrambling to try and figure out, how do we use them? How do we not use them? What's right? What's wrong? What are the ethics of this? And the big difference for me feels like we're having to speed run that process compared to what we had to do with social media. It's like we need to figure this out way quicker than it can't take 15 years because the technology will literally leave us behind, right?
I think what's scary to me is the combination of those two forms of technology. And we're already starting to see that now. And there are some organizations who are absolutely on point with all of this, and they are absolutely exploiting one to exploit the other. And we're seeing a lot of misinformation with the current kind of conflict in the world as well. We're seeing lots of really negative impact from some of this. And in my mind, there has been a shift. So for me, the biggest risk there is the misinformation, polarizing groups, inciting certain feelings and things, trying to get a reaction that can be quite negative. But we've gone from a culture of questioning the output of technology to accepting it as true. And that's something that I know I'm trying really hard to work with my learners to focus on. I want them to question things. I want them to question me. I want them to question the world around me. And I absolutely want them to question the output of any of these tools, including social media.
So with bearing all of this in mind, do we need to change what we're hiring for in terms of the job models? Are they outdated perhaps? Do we need to take a serious look at what those jobs look like, not just now, but potentially next year or 18, 24 months in the future? How do we update them? How do we do things differently in terms of what we're hiring? Not so much the hiring process, we talked a little bit about that, but what we're hiring for.
Yeah, so I think they're intertwined, aren't they? Like the hiring process itself and what we're hiring for. Generally, the hiring process has been, okay, we're looking for qualifications. We've trusted that those qualifications are enough. With CVs, we're starting to see a huge amount of inaccuracies on CVs that are being submitted in applications to jobs, either unverifiable or just outright untrue. Where people have relied on these AIs and there has been this hallucination and they've created a CV that is ideal for the role rather than for the actual person that they're doing that for. We're also seeing a huge increase in the amount of kind of automated job applications that are going out. Tons of these. I'm sure I saw an article recently as well about well, I know that there are definitely organizations who have tried using AI avatars to carry out initial interviews. And we're starting to see, obviously, it would be no surprise to see people using AI avatars to actually do the interview for them. And when you've got remote roles and things like this, I can just see this crazy world where you've got AI working for AI, and where do the humans fit in ultimately?
We've
Um,
almost taken ourselves out of the race though there, haven't we? Because you've got AI hiring AI, like an AI agent hiring an AI agent. Where's the person in that? It's just, we've removed ourselves by default.
Absolutely. So I work with the apprenticeship program here at MKU, and one of the things that really drew me to this role is that it is project or problem-based learning, which means it links to knowledge, skills, and behaviours. They're very practical tasks, rather than being those kind of more traditional write an essay, which actually an AI can do probably a better job than I can on some of these things. So yeah, I think there will need to be a shift from um, those kind of more manual data processing side of things, just regurgitating information, to that critical thinking, and that practical application. I like to refer to Bloom's taxonomy, which talks about different kind of levels of understanding. And if we're talking about what that scale looks like, right at the bottom, we've got recall. How much knowledge can you recall? What can you find? What information can you regurgitate? AI is great at that. It can do a far better job of scanning the internet and finding a summary of a particular topic than I can. It would take me ages to do that. And actually, that's okay. We want to be using these tools to do things like that. But when it comes to the application, how are you going to apply that to a human being? And it is about bringing that human back into it and realizing that the roles that interact with humans in particular, we do need to keep that human in the loop and have that critical thinking and that kind of ethical mindset. So yeah, I think in terms of the skills we're looking for, we absolutely need to be looking for compassion, kindness, empathy, all those things that a machine is actually really struggles with, and that are actually really important when we're talking HR in particular and people more broadly.
Yeah, so we need to recognize what can human beings still bring to the table that AI struggles with, and really lean into that. And there was an interesting comment just on the screen there from Phoebe, who was talking about how AI can be seen as a bit of a boogeyman for some people, and they're worried it's going to steal their jobs. And you've already kind of alluded to, it's not so much taking your jobs, but it's replacing the more mundane things and enabling you to do more, be more efficient, more effective, and do more in less time to a higher quality potentially. But she did ask also, do we need to think about the way AI is implemented? A lot of people are concerned about the energy requirements of this, and certainly if you look at the stock market at the moment and look at the energy indexes, they're all going straight up and to the right. So we can see that there is a huge increase in demand for energy, and I think largely because of the rise in AI and quantum computing and robotics. All of these things need energy, and it's a very interesting world that we live in. So do we need to change the way we implement? Do we need to lean in more to renewables, or is the whole kind of conversation a moot point anyway?
So I think a lot of this comes back to these kind of big tech companies who almost have a monopoly on this space. They want you to use your products through them. They can provide that additional support. And don't get me wrong, there are absolute valid reasons why that's a good thing to do. However, there are things like locally hosted options that get rid of the concerns around security as well, and that are far more manageable in terms of an energy usage perspective, because it's not having to be stored elsewhere, or moved halfway across the cloud network, as it were. So yeah, locally hosting options are definitely something that I don't think are considered enough. And I do think that we need to be very aware about where those lines are drawn. And that's going to be different for every individual. And one of the beautiful things I think about AI is that it can be applied in very different ways. So when we come back to that idea of, okay, we're looking for an organization whose thoughts and values and culture align with your own beliefs, there can be that differentiation now. And it's going to be something I think that people who are looking for employment really consider. What is your AI policy? What tools are provided? What training is offered? How do you consider the environmental impact there? Yeah, I do think we need to consider it, and I think that was an excellent point. My messages have disappeared, unfortunately, so I can't see back to that.
No, that's great. Thank you. So let's shift into talking a bit more about blue collar versus white collar here. And, we're starting to see something interesting happen insofar as that AI is just automating a lot of those traditional white collar knowledge work roles, as we've already discussed, while your more kind of technical or engineering and practical roles are becoming more valuable. So are we seeing a shift in how we value those different types of work?
I would say so. Looking at the statistics, it's the kind of clerical roles, those kind of entry level white collar jobs that are really being impacted here by uptakes. They're the ones that are most easily automatable using this technology. Whereas, the blue collar jobs, if we can't, the infrastructure that is required to automate those low level white collar jobs require blue collar workers, right? So suddenly there is being a shift. People are investing. I read an article this morning that was saying that Google are looking at 100,000 new electrical engineers or something to build in infrastructure, which I think is, I mean, it's fantastic because obviously we need those roles as well. But it does see a shift, and I'm saying this as somebody who works within a university space as well. I suppose obviously universities are seeing a massive impact by this shift.
Yeah, and what you mentioned there with Google is true across the technology sector. If you look at the earnings reports for a lot of the Mag 7 and the big tech companies, a lot of them are now, they've got these big promises. They've done a lot of kind of innovation work, but now they're having to embark in capital expenditure, capex, because they've got the kind of brains, but they now need to start building out that infrastructure. And you're right, whereas typically, a brain was valued quite more highly than muscle. I think we're seeing a shift in that now, whereas actually the brain isn't so valuable because it's actually quite cheap to run an AI that can perform in a lot of cases much better than any human brain already, never mind where it's going to be in 12 months. Whereas the robotics, although the technology's there, we still haven't managed to put the two together. And so actually human muscle is now something that we can't just easily replace with robotics. I mean, it's coming. If you look at the Tesla Optimus robot, and Elon Musk is talking about the first 2,000 Optimus robots are going to be for Tesla. So they are literally going to get them to a point where they can just replace a lot of their workforce and a lot of the muscle element of their workforce. So make no mistake, this is coming. But certainly we're in this transitional phase where it seems like the brain is kind of already been outsourced and the muscle seems to be a bit more valuable now. So if organizations can't hire the skills that they need, should they be focused more on building them internally instead?
Can I just say, how exciting is that though? Like being around for that transitionary period.
Oh, we're going to see it. Yeah, it's incredible.
Oh, it blows my mind. And we've seen this whole kind of spectrum. Um, Yeah, sorry. I'm going to come back to that in a second if that's all right. But I
Yeah, of
just
course.
wanted to kind of highlight this thread. Um, Robotics, initially, they kind of brought robots into those factory spaces. They were automating the very, very low muscle requirements, very automated kind of muscle memory. Can we do that very basic, put one thing next to another? Can we fill the pot? Can we? So we've automated the kind of physical, low level physical stuff. Now we're automating the low level mental stuff. So yeah, it is about where the key difference. We're looking for the higher level of both, right? We're looking for the highly skilled blue collar workers. We're looking for the highly skilled white collar workers. And that digital skills gap is for the digital technologies for the high skilled area there. Because it's building those systems, it's maintaining those systems, it's operating those systems that is going to be so important. And unfortunately, the people most impacted by this, I think, are going to be our young entrants to the workforce.
Yes, absolutely. And I look at my eldest is 11 years old. He'll be 12 this year. And by the time he's 18, I have no idea what world he's going to walk out
Mm.
into. What skills is he going to need? What jobs are they going to be? There's probably going to be a load of jobs, as I mentioned earlier, that don't even exist yet. We couldn't even fathom, couldn't even think of it. Um, it's both an incredibly exciting and interesting, but also a very scary position to be in, because, if we're honest, we can sit here and have these wonderfully interesting conversations, but we really don't know what's around the corner. Are we looking at a Terminator 2 type world with Skynet in the next 5 or 10 years, or is this just going to completely revolutionize value creation on planet Earth as far as we're concerned as a human race? It's an incredibly interesting but incredibly uncertain time as well. And I think you're right. That's most going to be noticed by the younger generation who, us older people, we're kind of already in the world of work and we're doing our best to adapt and to pivot with these changes coming in. But actually, we're kind of building on stuff that's already there and we're changing with the times. Whereas these young people, and I just come back to an earlier point you made as well about educational institutions and how largely they just aren't equipped, they aren't set up to prepare young people today for the world that's coming. And I think half of that is, well, half of that it's just antiquated, and half of it is just, well, we really don't know, what are we preparing them for?
One of the most shocking statistics for me, actually, because we naturally look to education to try and prepare people coming in, right? But 80% of the 2030 workforce are already in employment. So you absolutely highlighted that one of the fundamental issues here, organizations, if they're looking for these skills, need to look at upskilling themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's true of organizations as much as it's true of parents. We can't just be sitting by idle expecting schools, colleges, universities to do this hard graft for us. We all need to be taking more personal responsibility, whether that's in our home environments or in our professional environments, to help build each other up and lift each other up and get everybody to where they need to be to really embrace this brave new world. So I've got an audience engagement question. We've been going for 40 minutes here. It's amazing how quickly time flies when you're talking about something so enthralling and interesting as this. But I'd love to know from the audience, whether you're watching live or on the replay, drop a comment in the comment section to this video. Are you struggling to hire digital talent, or are you struggling to develop it internally? And what do those challenges look like? How is that manifesting in your business? Please do drop us a comment and let us know. And I've got one last question for you, Storm, if I may. And thanks again so much for being on the show today. It's been super interesting chatting with you, and I knew it would be. If you could give HR leaders just one piece of advice about preparing their workforce for, let's say, the next 5 years, what would it be?
I would say make use of AI in training and upskilling. Like, one of the things it's really good at is saying, okay, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? Encouraging your workers to use it almost like a career coach so that you can best place those individuals for success within your organization as well. Making that shift from trying to look at, we're looking to fill a specific role, to, okay, how can we make best use of the workforce that we have and really helping them in achieving success, because surely that's what drives the business overall.
Yeah, and it just something interesting just came to me there. Maybe the hiring process, recruitment process, is less about filling a role moving into the future. Maybe it's more about solving a problem. What
Mm.
problem are we? What challenge are we trying to solve here? What solution are we trying to find? Rather than, oh, I need this role and here's the set parameters. Because I think we're moving away from an environment where there can be really set parameters for a role. I mean, you'll always have those kind of guardrails, but actually it's becoming a lot more expansive and a lot more fluid, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you only have to look at the amount of change programs that are going on in various organizations at the moment. The roles people are looking for are shifting. So what happens to all those individuals who are currently in those roles? You've got a digital skills gap in one area and you're letting people go in another. How can you retrain the workforce that you have? And if that's the case, the shift comes not from what can they already do to what is their potential, what are their areas of interest, and how can we make best use of the individuals that we have who are committed to our purpose.
And I think that's a perfect cliffhanger to draw this to a close on. Storm, you've been fantastic. It's been a really fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for giving up some of your time this morning to come and speak with me and with our audience. Really appreciate it. It's clear that the digital skills gap isn't just about hiring more tech specialists. It's about how organizations rethink skills training and workforce development altogether, I think. And Again, just want to say a huge thank you for joining us today, Storm. Always a pleasure chatting with you. And of course, thank you to everyone who's tuned in, our audience on LinkedIn, and everyone who's left a comment today. We always really appreciate you getting involved. And, you know, if you're watching this on the replay, you can still get involved. So do drop us a comment. We'll be back with our next show next month. We've got a wonderful guest, Florence Hunter, another AI enthusiast. She's the group head of HR at the Torrington Group, and we've got another very interesting conversation lined up for you then as well. So that is going to be the first Friday in April, and keep an eye on our LinkedIn pages because you'll see it advertised on there. But we look forward to seeing you then. So once again, thank you to you all for watching today, and another special thanks to you, Storm, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. Take care.